before we go live. So that's now recording. And like I said, I'll introduce you. So we're going to go live in 3, 2, 1. Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's session. We're just going to give a few seconds here for everybody to filter in from the session auditorium. And if you wouldn't mind dropping in the chat where you're calling in from today, we have a global audience, so it's always fun to see where everybody is and what time of day it is for you as well. All right, let's get going. So welcome to our session today. And Timo, it looks like your background actually just went away for us.
So now you should be able to see that I am in Paris. So since you're all you asked us to share where we're from. So this is the view behind me of the Eiffel Tower from my attic in Paris. So I'll go back to the slides if you like. There you go.
Okay, thank you so much. And so our session today, as you can see, is analytics success in a world turned upside down. What changed and what didn't? And not that he needs an introduction, but we have with us today Timo Elliott. He is SAP's VP and Global Innovation Evangelist, and I know he's excited to get started. So Timo, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Thank you very much, Brianna. And hello, everyone. Yes, I am passionate about analytics success, but please don't hesitate to use that chat function. The one little thing to note is that the little to button, it's by default, I think it goes to panelists. So make sure it's on panelists and attendees if you want to share where you are to the world. So hi to Bala in St. Louis and hi to Jennifer in New Hampshire. Thank you for joining us. So we're going to talk about analytics success. Just very briefly, there's been a huge surge of interest in analytics. We're going to look at real-world examples and all of the things that go wrong typically, and then basically what are some of the new opportunities for fixing some of the things that typically go wrong. And hi, Michael. Welcome from Sacramento. So, brief introduction from me. I am an innovation evangelist for SAP, coming up to 30 years with the company. I joined with the acquisition of Business Objects a few years ago. I live in Paris, and my job really is to work with customers on the leading edge of innovation, gather the lessons learned, and share that with everybody else so that we can all be more successful. But today, I'll be focusing on my passion really, which is analytics. And so just here's the context or the slide for the topics today. And I've said, well, we'll cover. So what I'd like to do is, as much as possible, there's the chat there, so ask me questions at any point. I'd like to keep this interactive. It makes it more interesting for everybody. But also, not just questions. If you have something to add, there's an awful lot of experience on this call. So if you have some other feedback, things that work for you, or you disagree, please put it in the chat and share it with everybody else. And again, it means that the session will be better for everybody. And I'm going to be going fairly quickly because one of my biggest problems is I always have far too much content. So I'm going to try and be crisp in my delivery and make sure that we have time for interactive Q&A. And obviously, if you ever want to find out any more about any of this, you can follow up with me directly or the rest of folks from SAP. So let's start with an introduction to the sort of background of what I think is happening with analytics. Now, there was a great study that didn't come out. It's not public, so I can't really quote it. But it turns out that analytics is the -- pandemic technology. It's the #1 thing that people cited when they asked about what they were investing in as cause of this. Why? Well, because the one thing that we can be certain about is that uncertainty is going to continue for quite a while yet. Now, in the US, most places are doing a fantastic job with the rollout. Here in Europe, we're having a few teething problems. But clearly, we're on the right road to recovery, but we're not there yet. In the meantime, people don't want to be in the dark. Business people want data now more than ever, right? They're used to data being useful because their business model was fairly stable. Business model is not stable right now. People need data to do new customer experiences, new business models, new forms of selling their products and services. We've seen a lot of businesses that there's been a lot of digital transformation. Nothing is impossible anymore. This was a quote from a customer I talked to, a chief value officer for a retail store. They do sports equipment. And what he meant was, that projects that they thought were going to take years were suddenly able to be done in weeks or months because they had to be done in weeks or months. And so there's a real opportunity. If you've got some data and you can add value to the business, people are more willing than ever to listen to that product. So more data than ever, visibility into the present, huge interest in everything to do with predictive. People want to know what's about to happen, and the agility to adapt quickly. In the IT industry, we talk a lot about agility, and most of the time I think people just sort of say, well, yeah, whatever, that doesn't mean much. But I think it's been proved that agility is incredibly valuable when everything is changing so quickly. So stakes are higher than ever, we mentioned that, and I think there are growth opportunities. In many organizations, the industry as a whole has maybe suffered, but the companies that had invested in digital transformation are typically in a good position, and they're now starting to look forward to being able to grab some market share from their less fortunate competitors. So, after a forest fire, there's new opportunities for growth. I think that's what we're seeing in the industries in general, and it requires data. And it's worth mentioning, data is a great career plan. I think given that there's been lots of uncertainty, knowledge is power. If you have data and you can provide it to executives and help them with their careers, that's great for your career too. So hi Danielle in Madrid. Muchas gracias for joining us. This is the data value formula. Hopefully you already seen this in SAP materials. It's basically the 4 things that we think that you kind of need: span, amount, quality, and usage of data. So if you put those 4 together, that's how you maximize the value. You get data from as many places as possible, as large as possible, best quality as possible, and you actually make sure that people actually use it. These are all obviously technologies that we help you with the SAP Business Technology Platform. So for the rest of this presentation, I'm going to go through each one of those in turn, right? So traditional barrier number 1, span of data. Did you know that there's more data than ever before? The explosion continues, right? There's even more IoT data in particular. Everybody I talk to has an IoT project somewhere. Experience data, customer experiences. 5G is about to hit. We've heard a lot about the consumer uses of 5G, but it turns out that the B2B uses of 5G are probably actually much more important. Not so much the speed, but it also works at much lower energy levels. So you can put lower cost sensors and be able to capture that information from further away, more scattered. So it makes it much easier to tag everything and track what's going on. Outside data. So, analytics started with analyzing information inside your organization. Now the information that comes from outside, market data, benchmark data, government data, is just as important. Cloud tipping point. There's been a lot of resistance to moving analytics to the cloud over the years, partially because the data gravity was on premise. Most of the data was stuck in the internal systems, and moving it up to the cloud just seemed a lot of extra effort. Now the tide is turning because a lot of the operational systems are already in the cloud. A lot of third-party data is coming into the cloud, and so it makes just as much sense to move the remaining on-premise data up as it does to move all of that cloud data down, right? So that's the tipping point, and we're starting to see that in a lot of organizations. I have illustrated this presentation with links to entries in the SAP Innovation Awards. So these are just some quick examples. Mahindra, fantastic project to do with engines. So the idea is they make tractor engines and so on, and they do a check of every engine. They do a cold test. So it's an electric motor that tries to turn the crankshaft. They measure 400 different things, and it just takes a couple of minutes. Now, most of the engines pass that test, and it's all great, but sometimes it fails it, and it needs to go to a hot test or a load test, and that takes much longer, up to 12 minutes. And they thought, well, maybe we could use machine learning to take all of the data from the hot tests and the cold tests that we've done in the past and do a better job of detecting whether it's really passed the cold test or not, whether it really needs to do the load test. Turns out it worked great. The models helped a lot, millions of dollars in additional savings, and 350 labor days a year by eliminating more or less the hot tests. Again, so IoT and data. Faris is a great smart water platform. They're a Belgian supplier of water, and they do wastewater. And they're using sensors throughout their system to detect leaks. Really cool stuff. Like they're actually using satellite images now. And the satellite images can detect areas where there's groundwater. Right? It's used for agriculture and things, but it turns out it does a great job detecting leaks when there's a sort of a puddle where there shouldn't be. And it also turns out that gathering all this data has been really good, not just for their business, but also for other authorities. They're also really interested in finding out about the water flow, water safety, and so on. And Alstom, they make trains. They used to be called, this in Belgium, Bombardier Transportation. And they assemble the train wagons in Bruges in Belgium, and they have these racks that travel from the suppliers to the assembly point. They did a pilot with 800 of these racks with low Ra sensors. So these are low sensors that you can put on things and detect them far away. And they were able to do a much better job of tracking everything. And so that meant less time on rack management. They didn't need as many of these racks. And it turned out that sometimes the racks weren't available. So the suppliers used to have to do these like one-off wrapping of all of these sensitive components. And that just generated huge amounts of waste packaging. So better efficiency, better speed, and better for the planet because there's less wastage. So a lovely example of using information better. Again, sap.com/innovation awards, or just click on the links in the PDF in the notes, and you will find more information. Too dispersed. One of the big problems of having all this data all over the place is you're trying to get it all in one place. And there's been a big shift in the last decade from, the one infrastructure where you're going to try and get all of the data into a single place. And we're now moving to a more federated approach where the data is brought together on demand as needed. So SAP Data Intelligence is a fantastic project for this. Data orchestration, as it's called. Again, I have to be a little. I could talk for hours about any one of these products. Data catalogs. Now, data catalogs are an important part of your overall information infrastructure. Basically, they're guides to where the information is and what it contains, but it can mean different things to different people. So, for example, the Data Intelligence has a metadata explorer. You can point it at a data source, and it will mine it to try and figure out what is in that data source, so to make it easier to link with other data sources. Then there's also in Data Intelligence Machine Learning Data Manager. This is specifically for more machine learning type of projects where you need to store variations of that data. So you're sort of cleansing it, you're adding variables, you're keeping various stages as part of your data science project. So there's a special manager for that in Data Intelligence. And then, of course, SAP Information Steward is our data governance project. That has more like the data catalogs that you might get from third-party vendors like Elation or Talend or Informatica, where these are things where a little bit more of a bottom-up approach, where people can tag information sources in a catalog saying, hey, I've got an information source. It could be a spreadsheet, could be a system, and they fill out the details of the metadata to help other users like themselves find that information. Again, an important part of an overall information governance project. Again, any questions, anytime, please go ahead. If something I'm saying is not clear, if I'm using an acronym and I've forgotten to explain it, please go ahead and tell me. Big rise in streaming data. So real-time data, but then streaming data, things like sensors and click streams and operational logs. This data tends to be just huge volumes of small amounts and tends to be messier data as well. So we've got a number of streaming technologies. SAP HANA Smart Data Streaming is a part of it. There's the ability to batch information on the fly. Again, most projects are moving this way, all towards more real-time data from multiple sources. Okay, next barrier, there's a bit of overlap between the different barriers. Amount of data, right? This used to be a huge data problem. We were always struggling with how to store the data that we had access to. Big data came along, and it was a big, huge problem to deal with big data. But now, you know what? We kind of fixed it to a certain extent. Thanks to the cloud, there really are no limits. You can store as much data as you want. Of course, you still have to pay for it. There are costs associated with it. You might have security and compliance problems and data swamp problems. If you store everything, then over time the quality of that data becomes less and less relevant, and you end up storing it for nothing. Now, there's a whole rise in storage architectures. So we talked about data warehousing, and then data marts, and then spread marts, and now one of the newer ones is data lake houses. This is supposed to be an infrastructure that marries the best of data lakes with data warehouses. So I've been joking that it's more, data. What did I call it? Data lake warehouse spread mart sheets. It's clearly the future where we bring all of this together. Talking about data intelligence, I just remembered a story about Costain. I just recorded this. It's a project that's in the Innovation Awards. I forgot to mark it down, but they do infrastructure projects, and they did exactly this approach where they bring the data together on the fly only. So they deliberately don't store any of the data. They're bringing data from all of the different projects around the UK in order to optimize the productivity of the different projects. And so they've avoided the storage problem by doing it all live, federated approach using data intelligence. Staging of data. So there is no one right answer for storing information. It depends very heavily on what the kind of data it is and what you're going to do with it. So these are some of the things that you have to take into account. Information half-life, so addresses, people move, the information quality starts going down, you have to manage that. Usage frequency, you might need just to store your financial information for 20 years in case somebody does an audit in 10 years. But you're never going to query that data, so they can just go to complete cold, tape backup storage. Things that are changing, increasingly intelligent. So you've got self-driving databases that intelligently move the data into higher level, faster caches as and when it's needed. There's some really interesting things on the SAP HANA database roadmap for that, and increasingly integrated with analytics. It used to be there was a real sharp division between the place you store data and the place you went to and the tools you use to access that data. That's increasingly becoming blurred. So there's an integration of the data storage and the data access, like at SAP, right? It's the business technology platform. It has everything you need to store the data and access it in one seamless whole. Query speed, or speed of data. Now, again, this means different things according to what we're talking about. It could be query speed, how long you have to wait to get an answer when you click return. This used to be a huge problem. Again, thanks to the cloud, thanks to in-memory and so on, pretty much a fixed problem. Again, doesn't mean it's necessarily cheap, but you can get any kind of query speed you like if you're staging the data properly. Latency, everybody's moving to more streaming data, so no batch, just like real time. Again, the IICC project, they can literally drill into a particular work site and they can watch the diggers as they go around the site, because they've all got IoT, it's got GPS, and it's sending that information in real time to the back end. So why not do real time when you've got the infrastructure to include it? And it means that you can make a difference in business processes. You can really fix something now before it goes wrong, instead of only getting the information from last week. The last part about speed is adapting to new needs. And this is the hard part. We're going to touch on this later, but ultimately this is the biggest problem. We know how to do analytics right. What's hard is to do it fast enough to keep up with the changing business needs. A lovely example for quantity of data is the Max Planck Institute. They have just, let's see, find my notes here. They had 20 gigabytes of data every second. Oh no, what have I done with it? I didn't move it to the right place. Oh well, so I have to do it from memory. Anyway, so they've got a brand new radio telescopes, and this is generating terabytes of data a second. So they had to come up with completely new approaches to analyzing and using that information. And they turned to SAP Data Intelligence in order to be able to keep up with that. So they need to go through a whole cycle of taking that information. They're actually taking the information from these radio telescopes and using it to try and find pulsars. They've found around 3,000 pulsars so far. They reckon they're going to find 30,000 pulsars in the next few years because of this immense new number crunching ability. So SAP Data Intelligence, SAP HANA, really a wonderful example of just pure speed and power when it comes to crunching data. Next barrier, quality of data. This one is really huge. This is the big problem. This is the one that really kills more analytics projects than just about anything else. And unfortunately, the problem of quality is actually getting worse in some ways because we have more and more external data. Things like sensors and customer experience data. These are they're less concrete than financial records, right? So there's the notion of what the data really means is much harder to know. There's a lot more noise in the data than ever before. It really is not a technical project. I've done whole presentations on just this one issue, but you can't fix it at IT. Data quality is a business problem. It has to be something that you do between business and IT, working very closely together, above all on making sure that you get the right data in the first place. And the problem is typically, again, sometimes it's ease of use, right? People hate putting the right data in, but a lot of the time it's just incentives. Salespeople, for example, hate putting data into the system. It takes up their time when they feel like they could be selling, and they really don't want to be spied upon. So they don't really want the managers to have detailed information about every one of their deals, right? They keep that in a little paper separate from the official system. And unless you can find a way to make sure that those salespeople feel like that's the right thing to do, to put all that data in, you're going to get bad data. So find out who cares about who doesn't care about the data quality if you're trying to fix it. There are tools at every level. Make sure that you've got good tools to make sure you capture the right data in the first place. IT data quality tools where you can sort of do fuzzy matching and make sure that the basics are, misspellings and things like that you can fix. Business data quality tools, this is where it's the next level above, where you actually let the business people do some of that correcting because they understand the context. They might see that two terms are the same thing even though they look different from an IT person's point of view, right? Two slightly different product names, but they're the same thing. Master data management, a lot of the data you really care about should be stored in a master data system. And Analytics Cloud has introduced new and better data wrangling. So this is like the last stage where you really just need to tweak that data, or it's coming from a spreadsheet where the data is bad quality and you don't have any IT people to fix it. You can fix it just at the analytics level. So who fixes data quality? Well, it has to be, again, a governance. It's an ownership problem. So you need tools like Information Steward, you need cycles, you need owners, you need master data governance. So again, we could talk for hours about this, but if you really want to improve the analytics in your business, you really have to do this inside your organization. Unfortunately, sometimes it's really hard to get people to actually get on board with the ROI. So actually, nobody wants to pay for good quality data because they don't know how it's going to improve their business, right? It just sounds like an extra overhead cost. But as I've got to say here, nobody has ever overestimated the time and effort it takes to fix data. I have almost never, one person last week claimed that they had estimated correctly, but most of the time, 99% of the time, I talk to people doing projects and say, hey, I know that data quality was going to be a problem, but it turned out that it was harder than you even imagined and budgeted for. And they say, yeah. So just whatever you think it is, invest more time and effort than you think into data quality as part of your project, because it will get your project done faster. You'll get the business benefits faster. One way of trying to get their ROI is to focus on the risk of bad data. There's some wonderful high-profile examples of organizations that have done spectacularly bad things because they had bad data quality. And so maybe point to some of those if you've got a business leader who's a little reluctant. Tetra Pak, interesting example. Back in 2005, they had a crisis in Italy where their customer Nestle reported that it detected traces of a chemical in some of the baby formula products. Tetra Pak make those paper packaging. And it turned out that it was a false alarm, but it was much harder to figure out that it was a false alarm and much harder to do an aggressive product recall than it should have been. So this set them on the road to really much better master data governance. And so now they've just invested in the latest version of our master data governance tools to use that, including the use of robotic process automation, for example. So when people add new products in, it gathers the data in a far more intelligent way than in the past, using sort of machine learning and pattern matching. Now, one way to fix bad data quality is by putting more integrated systems together in the first place, right? Have fewer gaps between systems. That's where the bad data gets in. So a couple of products there. Event Mesh is a cool name. It's the updated term for, gosh, what did we call it before? We love naming products. Again, it's the new name for SAP Cloud Platform Enterprise Messaging. It's basically the tool that you can use to send messages. So, a new hire in SuccessFactors, or somebody going on a trip in SAP Concur, or Cloud for Customer. There's an event in a customer's life marketing profile. All of those things you can tie to events, and then you can just pass the metadata on from one system to another in a more seamless way, so that you're not trying to do manual extract of data. You're just making it part of an integrated business system. Blockchain might be interested in particular complex systems where you have lots of different actors. Talk about that in an example in a minute. And then compliance. Again, you can use analytics as part of your compliance, and it turns out that it has extra benefits. So examples here, Zalando is a very successful online retailer. They have a division called Zalando Payments. So they need an e-money license from the German regulator because they need to guarantee the funds that are temporarily held as part of their business activities. So that money ultimately belongs to third parties. So, online retailers have 100-day right of, or customers have 100-day right of return. So that money has to be put in sort of like an escrow because it might need to be returned. So there's a certain amount of money that the regulator says they have to have on hand so that if businesses stop for some reason, the money is available to pay back to other organizations. But it's super complicated to work out how much money they need. 40 million transactions every 100-day reporting period, 20 payment methods, 17 countries. So calculating that amount is really hard. They turned to the University of Seville, for a mathematical model to help them figure out how much they should be holding each day for this regulated need. Now, it was very complicated, but they needed a very powerful system to bring all of that data together, and they built the model and then run it directly inside SAP HANA. So nice example of complicated analytics for information governance and compliance. They also turned out that having this information was incredibly useful for the rest of the business because it gives them a constant visibility into what their cash position is and the flows of money around the system. So they did it for compliance reasons, turned out super useful for everything else. Accelerate Energy, they have a very interesting project, again, Innovation Award, just one click away. And next generation supply chain, now they do complicated stuff. Floating liquefied natural gas regasification solutions. So if you're trying to get liquid natural gas from one place to another, you have to cool it down to minus 160 degrees, so it turns into slush, transport it somewhere, and then you have to heat it up again to get it back into gas so it can be unloaded and pumped to somewhere else. And so there are ships that do all that freeze it and then warm it up again. So Accelerate Energy is a leader in that. One of the problems is, though, that they had to work with lots and lots of different logistics partners around the world, and it was super complicated to try and figure out where their ships were and what stage they were in. So they turned to blockchain. So they're using the blockchain to gather the shipping-related information in real time. They're handheld devices at each point to update that information. And again, the blockchain helps because it's easy to audit. It's nobody has to trust anybody else. It's all very visible there on the blockchain. AI can help with data quality. Now, this is a really exciting area, given how big a problem it is. So, especially master data and metadata. So we have, there's a business service called Data Attribute Recommendation, and there's a lovely shipping example, not public, unfortunately. It was an automotive organization that they need to ship cars and components all over the place. Each component has a weight that it's supposed to be associated with, and then you put all of these weights together on a single shipment, and then that shipment goes out. But if there's a problem between the bill of what's supposed to be in the shipment and the total weight, then the authorities tend to think that people are trying to smuggle something. Right? So if it's like, oh, this is heavier than it should be according to the manifest. We're going to open it up. That introduces delays and costs. It's a bad idea all around, right? It creates havoc for the just-in-time supply chain. So what they did is they used artificial intelligence to go off all of those previous activities and figure out which were the components where the weight was typically wrong. Or, if they have a yellow widget and a red widget and a blue widget, they're all the same, then they can automatically decide that the maroon version of the widget is probably the same weight, even though it says something else in the manifest. So they used artificial intelligence to fix the quality of the data for the metadata, which in then turn helped everything else. Artificial intelligence is fantastic, but you have to be careful. Algorithms are psychopaths. They have no idea what they're doing. There's some lovely examples. One very quickly, wolves versus huskies. They trained an algorithm to detect the difference between wolves and huskies. Did it perfectly. Trouble was, they realized later that all it was really doing was detecting whether there was snow in the picture or not. If they put a husky on snow, it thought it was a wolf, because it had been trained off pictures of wolves in snow and huskies not in snow. So a great example of where things can go wrong. When it comes to data quality, so unstructured data, so this is like the meaning of the data. It's not really data quality per se, but it's more like whether you're actually using the data as it's supposed to be used. So context is everything. Just even defining things like what daily means can be super hard. There's no magic bullet here. You just have to work hard on making sure that everybody's talking about the same thing at the same time. Again, SAP Information Steward is a great tool for help. More good data. Again, the more you can do out of the box, the more likely it is you're going to get high quality data. So we offer analytics business content. So like out of the box, predefined dashboards and so on. Could be a really useful way to make sure that the information you're presenting is the information that people want to see. We have this one domain model. So this is the business terms across all of the different SAP end-to-end systems. So recruit to retire, lead to cash, source to pay, design to operate. Along each of these, we defined the key business terms and what they mean and how they look and so on, so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel each time. You can just use those, and they're common across the SAP systems over time. We're going to get closer and closer to having this one domain across everything we do. And then SAP Graph is the API programming model that lets you access those very easily, no matter what the underlying system. So, customer or employee, no matter where you get that data from, you can just use one API and it'll always be in the same format. Flexibility and federated control. SAP Data Warehouse Cloud was a big missing part of the puzzle in that, from a sort of data meaning point of view, corporate would define overall what the data meant, but business people wanted to tweak it. They had their own hierarchies. They need to add some context, and you couldn't necessarily do that all in SAP Analytics Cloud, the SAP Data Warehouse Cloud, as well as being a great just cloud data warehouse, with all of the functionality you'd expect. It also has these things called spaces. So these are autonomous data modeling sandboxes, if you like, at the business level. So you can give it to a business team and say, hey, there's all this corporate data. You're allowed to get your particular view of that based on the criteria that you want in this area. So that's that great combination of governance and flexibility for the business people. Both Porsche and Velux indicated that they're using this product for exactly that meaning. They were using BW, already using SAP Analytics Cloud, and this was a perfect tool to fit in between the middle. Okay, last barrier, and perhaps most important, usage of data. Data is useless on its own until you do something with it, until something changes in the business. So because it's less technical, we don't spend maybe as much time on this sometimes. We talk about adoption, but it goes, really quite far. So analytics is always a business process. We tend to think of operations as one thing and then analytics as a separate thing, but they're kind of the same thing. Typically, if somebody's looking at a report, they're thinking about, once I've looked at this report, I'm then going to do this if this happens. So it's like lighter touch than our operational applications, but it's still very much a business process. Gartner calls this continuous intelligence, where you're really embedding real intelligence directly into operational applications. And of course, we're doing that with SAP Analytics Cloud, the go-to solution in S4HANA, SuccessFactors, and so on. Data science projects. The big problem with data science projects is that they often don't go production. They look at some data, they have an interesting theory, but it never really gets turned into anything. So we have a factory approach with our design tool, data intelligence in particular, and we can help you embed machine learning directly into your finance systems, for example. So Döhler is a great example of using the SAP Cash application. So machine learning built directly into a financial application. So doing something that people used to have to do, matching invoices with payments, now the algorithm can do it for you instead. It makes a lot more sense. And we just announced some new productivity integration, so that, for example, if you've got a team of people that regularly look at data on a basis, why not do it directly in Teams, but you can now open SAP Analytics Cloud directly in a Teams space, and then we have tools to be able to collaborate around that data. Again, making it more part of a process, more part of what you do all day, rather than a separate environment that you have to move to in order to do something different. Once you've got the data, you've made a decision, you have to do something with it. So analysis and action. Integrated planning is one of the key differentiators of the SAP Analytics Cloud. And there's a huge interest in predictive planning in particular, where you're forecasting the future based on the past and the trends and the inputs. So it makes perfect sense. It's kind of bad that we haven't been able to do that in the past. Now you can. And obviously, we want to be able to change quickly based on data. So learn how to use information, change something in the business, ask better questions. That's really the aim of every good analytics team, is to help the organization adapt faster to changing events. A couple of great examples. Again, you can click through to see more details. Integrated analytics and budgeting in mining with BHP in Australia, and then Roche with predictive planning in pharmaceuticals. Again, any questions, anytime, please don't hesitate to let me know. Ease of use. So at one level, we lost a generation here, unfortunately. So we had fantastic tools, like Excelsius. People loved Excelsius. It was a great dashboarding environment, very interactive, nice to look at. But it was based on Adobe Flash and very much desktop-based. And of course, we have to move everything to the cloud. And so a lot of the old tools couldn't be moved to the cloud. So we have to rethink how things worked. And then the old world was very batch-based. Now it has to be real-time based. So anytime you click on anything, we expect and can get the answer in real time. So anyway, we had to rethink the user interfaces for analytics completely, more or less, over the last decade. We're finally getting to the point where they're easier and more intuitive than maybe they were a decade ago. The hardest thing for most people to do when it comes to analytics is just log on. Just make that first step super easy. A lot of people go, oh, I love some data, but I don't know where to go, so I'm going to give up. So really make it easy for people to get a report, get them started, get them hooked on information, so then they can go and look for more. A lot of people just want somebody to go and ask and get the data for them, but that doesn't really scale. You can do things like, for simple questions, SAP Conversational AI has been really interesting. So it's not really analytics, it's just straightforward answers to simple questions, right? It's used for customer service, but you could also use it for things inside your organization. How many days of vacation do I have left? Or how many minutes do I have left on my telephone plan, right? These are numeric answers to questions, so they're queries at one level, but just making it super easy for people to ask that question, use their voice or typing, and get the answer. And if you saw the keynote from Ivor, you know that we are investing in things like voice to insight. So really being able to ask the questions very easily on a mobile device, using all of your existing metadata in SAP Analytics Cloud to go and just get the right answer for you. So AI is really helping. This is a huge area of opportunity, automated discovery, making it easier to figure out what's going on and so on. Adoption is relatively low so far. Most people need to walk before they can run, but I have really high hopes of doing that in the future. And it's worth noting, as we talk about adoption, there are limits, of course, right? You can't share everything. We've got some really interesting tools inside the business technology platform for protecting information. It goes everywhere from sort of normal security and profiles and so on, all the way through to some really interesting de-identification technology, or anonymization is sometimes called. That's a bit excessive, but de-identification. So you can actually do analytics on data but still make sure that people can't drill down into personal details for an individual. So for example, you can offer analytics on data without triggering GDPR problems in Europe, or the information protections have been put in place. So great way to get data out to people and still keep it safe. We talked about how hard it is to do the right thing. This is one of the toughest struggles for analytics organizations, is adapting fast enough. This, again, is not really so much about technology. The one thing about the cloud is it does mean that you can change things faster compared to previous generations, right? You can update that metadata. If you're doing a federated approach, then you can add new data sources relatively easily, and the data is immediately updated. So, and then you have to support the life cycle over time, from people asking their initial tentative questions to making it part of the overall system. People are the problem and the answer. Interesting enough, the research that we've done shows that people aren't really very good at asking the right questions in business. So analytics organizations really can go a long way by helping people not just get answers to questions, but asking better questions in the first place. Culture is really important. A lot of people have roles where they're not really incented to ask questions about their job or how to do their job better. They've been told, this is your job, go do it. And they're sort of waiting for somebody else to tell them how to do their job better. So try and be those people. Give them the information to help them improve their own jobs. Give them incentive to do so. And support decision making. Sometimes I see that people go wrong because they own an infrastructure and they say, oh, well, if it's touching our infrastructure, then we'll help you. But if it's not touching our infrastructure, nothing to do with us. Again, you have to be supporting the business, not the technology. If people need business answers and it's just not part of your infrastructure, you should still have systems in place to help that person with the rest of the analytics approach, right? Finding the data, making sure that it's the right quality, making sure it's used right. Otherwise, you're going to get blindsided by people using bad data to make bad business decisions, and IT will get blamed even though it wasn't part of their overall systems. The perennial problem of the ROI. What is the ROI of analytics? Well, what is the ROI of ignorance? It's really hard to know how much is the right amount to invest in analytics. So you have to do most people don't do formal ROI cases after the fact, but if you do, then you'll know that it does add an awful lot of business. So make sure you're analyzing, make sure people realize how much data they have now rather than before, and keep track of all of the times you've helped the business, because it'll help the next time you need to get analytics investment. Wrapping up. Here's the data value formula, span, amount, quality, and usage. A whole range of different products that you can see here as part of the overall business technology platform. I've included lots of links in this presentation to more of the details. Sometimes it can be a little overwhelming to see all of these things together, but the reality is that we have lots of customers very successfully using these projects all together. Whole bunch of links to help you be more successful. As you've seen, the Innovation Awards figured highly in this presentation. Great place to get for real-world examples of how people can use information in new ways. cp.com/BTP for all of the product information, or the community. Huge fan of community. Please don't hesitate to go to the community to get your answers, your questions answered, and please go there to answer the questions of other people. Insights.sap.com. This is the sort of more thought leadership. So if you're interested in what's happening next, the next big picture thing, please go there. Roadmaps.sap.com. News site, details of all the products, where they're going. My blog site, if you like cartoons, you might like teamelliott.com/blog/cartoons. Feel free to use them in your presentations. All right, key points to take home. Information analytics really valuable. Technology can help. The biggest problems are still, as ever, to do with people and organization. Good luck with your projects. So thank you for your time. We've got a few minutes left for any questions anybody has about any of that. And again, if anybody wants to ask me anything offline, please timo.elliott@sap.com, or Timo Elliott on Twitter, or Timo Elliott on my LinkedIn profile, Elliott with 2 L's and 2 T's. So thank you, Michael. Glad you enjoyed the presentation. Thank you for joining us. Luce, Danielle, Michael, Jennifer, Bala, if anybody has any questions, I'll stay on for another few minutes. Type away in the chat, put to panelists and attendees if you have anything that you'd like to know. A lot of people here in this group. Got over 30 people here. So Sherry, Philip, Sharon, Steve, Lisa, Irene, Eric, Dwayne. If anybody has a question, I'd be more than happy to answer it. But if not, I know you're busy people. I know you have other things to do. Stunned silence, I'm afraid, Brianna. Eric says it was very clear, so no questions needed. Well, thank you, Eric. It's been a pleasure talking to everyone. Have a fantastic rest of the event. Again, best of luck with your projects, and thank you for your time. Over to you, Brianna.
Thank you so much, Timo. This was a great presentation. Really appreciated the energy and the real-life examples that you provided. This concludes today's session with Timo. Thank you again, and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.